Hello, hello.
Howdy.
Hi.
So, what's been up the last 2 weeks?
The last 2 weeks, we've been making Triton VM faster. We're getting 20% there, 30% there from all sorts of unexpected angles. And the line that we drew in the sand for us when we quit focusing on improving Triton VM and start focusing on the missing parts of Neptune Core, the blockchain client, that's when there are no more order of magnitude improvements to be achieved.
But
And
do you know that going in whether those are still to be had?
oftentimes, yes, the canonical benchmark is how long does it take to run a proof of verification of a Triton VM proof. And that is simultaneously a proving exercise. I mean, you set your computer to prove something, but it's simultaneously the execution of a program. And so if you reason by changing this instruction somehow, or by introducing a new instruction, the program shrinks by 30%. Well, then you can predict a 30% prover speed up almost for free. And likewise, if you find a improvement to the proving algorithm, you can benchmark the step that you're looking at, and if you can, I don't know, parallelize it. Now all of a sudden you have 20 cores or however many cores to throw at the problem that you were previously solving with one core. They can logically infer, if we could parallelize it, then we would have this kind of performance. But most of the time there is some overhead due to synchronizing before and after parallelism, and so you don't quite get the neat calculation there. But it's still a very good rule of thumb. So yes, most of the time you do have a reasonable expectation how much a given improvement is going to yield. Um, what is difficult to predict is how many such cases you see. But I guess we've been pretty close to our expectations set up at the onset. We've had a few extra unexpected optimizations, but for the most part, we're doing all right.
All right. And before we started recording, you mentioned that you think it'll be a couple of weeks, I think, still on this.
Yeah, in the pipeline now, or what is it? Not yet in the pipeline, but still satisfying our arbitrary criterion for promising order of magnitude improvements are some mathematical innovations that a cryptographer different from me needs to look at and sign off on before we, well, maybe after we implement it, but certainly before we roll that out.
So you've had to invent some fundamentally new things in order to get this to work, or what?
I wouldn't say fundamentally new, but yes, it's innovation on the level of mathematics as opposed to on the level of programming.
Right. And are you the only one on the team that follows that, or is
Your feed
Ferdinand
seems
on
to have
board, or
died. I didn't catch that.
are you the only one on the team that really groks that part, or are you all on on board with the understanding of that?
I think we're all on board with the understanding, but at the risk of patting myself on the back, I think I'm the only one who's capable of inventing new maths in this domain. from our team.
Hmm. Okay.
But I do like to make a point of it, of explaining how everything works, because, well, if I should get hit by a bus, at least they can continue. And if they don't know how this stuff works, then the workload for me is just too large.
Okay, maybe that's an interesting segue into a slightly different domain. Work that is so important that that the person sort of carrying it should not, if they were to get hit by a bus, it should not stop. What I mean by that is private decentralized finance. We were talking about the case of Tornado Cash earlier, and you wanted to share some thoughts there.
Yeah. I I read the ruling. Dutch comes in handy every once in a while. And I was expecting the judges to make gross generalizations that are far from accurate in order to justify a prison sentence. But uh, that that kind of inaccuracy is not present. If you take the law and the political context for granted, as the judges do, then I have to say it's a pretty solid argument that they are putting out there. Of course, I don't take the law for granted. I think money laundering is always is and everywhere is a bogus charge.
Let's let me just pause you there. So what, according to you, is the government's argument here?
Um, so he's being charged and he was convicted of habitual money laundering. Habitual indicates that it wasn't a one-off thing. He put out tools that enable other people to launder money, and therefore he is culpable for that money laundering. Um, yeah, and money
So this
laundering.
was a developer that developed a, or together with some other developers, that developed a smart contract on Ethereum that allowed you to sort of mix your money in what, in like a provably private way, or what's the
That's
technology behind it?
exactly how it works. If I understand correctly, you would deposit your ETH into the smart contract and take out a token, and then at a later point, you transform that token somehow, and then at a third point, you can use the transformed token to withdraw some ETH. And since that token has been transformed in between withdrawing and uh, depositing it, uh, that breaks linkability. And so the ETH that you take out is not linkable to the ETH that you put in.
Mhm. Okay, and so the government is saying because he was living in the Netherlands, their jurisdiction, and because he contributed significantly to the source code, and I believe they used like the GitHub to prove that. So there's a use case for private source code contribution as well. Um, because of those things, they argue that he's guilty of I guess money laundering knowingly.
Knowingly, intentionally, and habitually.
And so which part do you find solid? What do you mean? What you find it a solid argument?
Well, I had expected the judges to say, we don't buy the part about you not being in control. I had expected them to take bogus proof as though it were solid evidence that he was in fact in control, and then convict him based on that bogus proof.
Okay.
Um, in fact, the judges were much more reasonable than that. They said, we take for granted that you are no longer in control, but you built it this way. And the fact that you built it this way does not exculpate you. And so, yeah, they
But
go ahead.
I'm guessing that you believe that it does.
I'm not convinced about that. I listen. I don't think money laundering is a natural law. I think it's a artificial, fictional law um, that can be justified in good faith uh, if you want to go after real crimes, but in effect is it doesn't even help you going after real crimes. Real crimes being murder for hire, robbery, uh, human trafficking, and stuff that is lucrative and that generates cash flow in need of whitewashing. Um, so it's not the whitewashing of the cash that is criminal in my eyes. It's the primary crime that is criminal. You're not supposed to kill. You're not supposed to contract for killing. You're not supposed to rob, and so on. And going after the whitewashers is a little silly. Um, it's like going after the the taxi driver who happens to be taxing the bank robbers um, away or to their crime location. Well, it's different if the taxi driver knows that he was doing it versus if he doesn't know. I'd argue if the taxi driver has no knowledge and he shouldn't be asking every client, "Are you going to go to a bank robbery? Because if so, I can't take your fare." He's not going to ask that. It's not his responsibility to ask that. And so the taxi driver should assume good faith from his clients,
But
and that
sure,
exculpates
should
him.
the taxi driver understand? But to come up with a better analogy, what if you create like an autonomous taxi mobile that can only be used where in front of a bank building when the alarms are going off?
What if you create an autonomous vehicle that can be used for taxiing people only away from a bank and only if the alarms are on? Actually, I
Right.
think there can be loads of legitimate use cases for that, right? Even if
Well, sure,
you
sure, sure.
restrict yourself to alarms that are being set off due to a robbery, if I'm in the bank and there's a robbery going on in that building, I want to get out as quickly as possible, and I will thank God to whoever built me that custom taxi.
But I think the court would agree in this case that there's you can probably come up with some use cases, but because I didn't read the whole verdict, but I could imagine that they would argue that this is so well fit for money laundering that they assume that that's like a very large part of its usage of is with the intent to launder
Yeah.
money, and that he knew this going
Yes.
in, just as you would know that going into developing that
Yeah, so
taxi
a large
in
part of
front
the
of the
ruling is
bank.
spent justifying that he had every reason to assume and expect that it would be used for money laundering. And that's once again where the judges come out stronger than I had expected beforehand.
But yeah, because which is true, right? He
Yes.
he had every reason to expect that, and
One
okay,
thing
but
that
so
I think
so
the ruling was deficient on was a comparison between the good that Tornado Cash brought about. Yes, some people managed to launder their ill-gotten gains, but how many people acquired the privacy that they sought? That number is missing.
Well, well, but they would only care for the people within the Netherlands because people in Venezuela, say, are outside their jurisdiction.
Well,
So
interestingly,
can't
they
imagine.
did dump on North Korea as a totalitarian regime. I mean, the Dutch judges dumped on North Korea as a totalitarian regime that ought not to be funded, and in the eyes of the judges, Pratsef is guilty of that.
Interesting. So geopolitics getting involved. So why did you want to talk about this?
Because there were a couple of developments that I thought were interesting. One of which was the judges taking the argument of the defendant seriously. That, listen, guys, I'm not in control, and the judges respond, okay, we assume you're right, you're not in control, but you built it this way. Um, I didn't quite think things through beforehand that it could go that way, but it did. Um,
Does that change anything in your sort of in your mental model of this space?
Not really, no. Yeah, I guess I'm a little dismayed to see this conviction coming from a ruling that is sounder than I had expected going in, because I think it's a travesty of justice. Another
But which part? Which I don't think that's clear to the people listening to this. Which part exactly? Why is it a travesty of justice? I think so too, but I'd like to hear you elucidate your argument.
um, in the analogy where Petsef is a taxi driver and happens to have taxied some bank robbers to the bank and back, it the onus is on the prosecution to show that your taxi was used mostly, overwhelmingly, to ferry bank robbers and was not used mostly nor overwhelmingly for a legitimate purpose
But
of transporting individuals from locations A to locations B.
but yeah, but the taxi industry does not, unlike the financial industry, have this layer of rules, called KYC. So it's I think in anywhere in the world probably if you do anything with like financial services or like transferring cash, as soon as it gets a little bit professional, you will need to do KYC, know your customer. So you need to ID your customers. Even like small crypto
Yeah, I
exchanges need to
say
do
we
this.
set fire to the whole law book of KYC and anti-money laundering stuff with it.
Okay, so your dispute is with KYC,
Yes.
but given
If
okay,
you take KYC and anti-money laundering laws for granted, then I think the ruling follows.
yeah,
Sad to say.
all right. And Neptune
Neptune
fixes this.
fixes this. Well,
I've been tweeting that every chance I get, tagging Sea God Crypto. If you guys are not following Sea God Crypto, that's the Neptune
I
account.
saw that. Yeah, that's nice. So,
But there's
does Neptune fix this? Possibly yes, possibly no. Um, well, fix this, right? I guess the question that you're getting at is there a possibility that the developers of Neptune will be charged with a similar crime? And I think one feature that distinguishes Neptune from Tornado Cash is that Tornado Cash is all three. It is simultaneously an entry point towards money laundering. I hate to call it that, but in the eyes of the law, that's the case. Simultaneously an entry point, simultaneously a mixer, and simultaneously an exit point. Whereas Neptune is at best number two only. It's a private money, but it doesn't come with an entry point nor an exit. Um, that makes it much more uneconomical to use for money laundering than something like Tornado Cash. Yeah, I don't know what else to say there. Um, and there are a few more points from this ruling that I would like to draw attention to. Um, One of the obvious points being how come protections on the freedom of speech don't apply? Um,
because it's code and code is speech.
but I think that's how things would be argued in the United States. Um, in the United States, you have a very expansive understanding of the protection on the freedom of speech. And the protection is encoded into the Constitution as the First Amendment. In the Netherlands, the Constitution is rather vague, and the protection on the freedom of speech comes in the form of um, exceptions to laws that enable the police to go after people. Like if you are an information distributor and you comply with lawful orders to take down information when they arrive, then you can claim immunity under freedom of speech. And that was, in fact, the defense that Petsev ran with. He complied with all orders that he was capable of complying with, all lawful orders, which was zero, but that doesn't hurt the truth of the statement. And so he should be protected by freedom of speech. Um, and the counter argument of the judges was, but you're not an information distributor. So the law that you cite, yes, it does have a exception in order to preserve freedom of speech, but the law doesn't apply to you to begin with. And so at that point, I think Pertsev's entire defense fell dead in the water. Um, yeah. And another point I wanted to draw attention to was the fact that Pertsev had a financial stake in the success of his project, and I thought going in that was what was going to do him in. That's the feature that's going to land him in prison. It's one thing to do money laundering. It's another thing to do money laundering if you have an incentive to turn a blind eye to who's actually doing the money laundering. And so Partsev's incentive came about even though he did not have any control over he did not have custody nor control over who was laundering money or how fast or anything like that. But there were a few not very meaningful ways in which the Tornado Cash protocol could adapt or evolve. And those proposals could be voted on. And in order to vote on those proposals, you need to show ownership of the project through a token. And so the token came with a project, and that token it accrued. Let me get this accurate, right? My understanding is that you had to pay fees in order to run the Tornado Cash mixer, and a portion of those fees went to paying the smart contracts, paying the stakers to run your smart contract, and the excess went into supporting the token. And Pertsev, it was argued and ruled, owned a large chunk of this token supply. And so it was argued that, and before, and the judges agreed with this argument, that Pertsev had a financial stake in turning a blind eye to the laundering of illicit funds. Um, from my reading of the ruling, it sounds as though this feature was irrelevant to the determination of guilt. They established guilt on completely different arguments. And then, after they had established guilt and had to determine the magnitude of the sentence, this feature weighed in. Um, yeah,
Interesting.
indeed. Um, so if he had not had this token, then maybe he would have had a lighter sentence. Um, maybe not. Who knows? He would certainly still have been found guilty, at least as far as the ruling goes. And another feature I want to draw attention to is um, that custody of funds was ruled not to be a requirement for culpability in money laundering. So custody being you have the
So,
power to stop it
so
or to send funds back to their origin, and you can. It was ruled that you can be guilty of money laundering even if you never have this power. And yeah, I struggle with that. I mean, the judges argue money laundering came about, and it was caused by this tool, and so whoever produced this tool contributed to the money laundering, uh, whether or not they ever had custody.
but but it's yeah. I wonder if you can do a thought experiment and see what happens if you, let's say, someone's able to design a virus that only infects and kills small children, but he doesn't release it. He just makes it available on the black market for a price, and someone pays it and then releases it. Is that person culpable at all for anything? I mean, that's obviously the most extreme you can take the
I
argument.
would say this
Doubting
virus
all the
designer
knobs.
is culpable, yes, but maybe this virus is, what is it? The fact that it has the tendency to kill children is a side effect of something else. For instance, curing cancer. It's guaranteed to cure your cancer,
Mhm.
but if you are a child, it might kill you. Then I think it's still worthwhile to be developed. Um, and yeah, in this case, I can't hold the developer accountable. I think it's similar to that because privacy is a good thing in addition to enabling bad things.
I think people in the West they struggle understanding the virtues of privacy. It's not, and it's also I find it also kind of difficult to argue in favor of. And the best argument that I've heard is this there's been research done into how many Jewish citizens in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands were shipped to gas camps per capita. And it turns out that this is far higher in the Netherlands than in Belgium and France. And one there's one famous paper, I forgot what the name is, but they argue convincingly that this is due to the fact that the Netherlands had the best system for ID cards. So the most people were ID'd. The IDs themselves were the most difficult to counterfeit. The resistance tried to bomb the locations where they had the IDs because once the Germans took that over, they had so much power and they were able to round up Jews so effectively, much more effectively than in Belgium and France. And that's a harrowing argument. And it sort of comes down to you should not. What does it come down to? You should not, I guess, have private information easily accessible because you don't know what kind of power may come in and do with that
Yeah,
information.
even if your current government are saints or run by saints, it, what happens when it gets taken over by Nazis?
Yeah, but that again, when I hear that, I'm like, yeah, probably not going to happen in our lifetime, and probably not. But that's not what you design
You design
systems
systems
for.
to last
You design
generations,
them for
and
the
it
edge
needs to be
cases.
robust
Yeah,
against such edge
yeah,
cases. Yes.
yeah. I think it helps having had or still having a father that escaped communist Poland to sort of drive some of these points home, or to give us an intuitive feel for, ooh, that's not good.
So
You don't
you
want
lived
that
in the
as a society.
Netherlands longer than I have. Can you speak to the under?
You never lived
Can you
in the
speak on
Netherlands.
the understanding of Anne Frank in with the common people? I mean, that's that's the harrowing case that you mentioned just now, brought to the most tangible extreme. Anne Frank was a real girl. That diary is real, and yeah, she had to hide from her government. It was not a legitimate government, but no government cares about uh, justifying its own existence. So yeah, didn't that experience and that what is it? Now it's a cultural feature. Didn't doesn't that cultural feature inform some decisions about privacy?
Which
Everybody
cultural
knows the
feature?
name of Anne Frank in the Netherlands for sure. In Belgium, maybe not.
Right. Well, there's a couple of interesting things going on. I had a brief foray into the crypto space. Worked for a Dutch company, and then I was in the decentralized identity sphere, which has a sort of is also partially blockchain related. And in that scene, there's apparently a bunch of Dutch people. The Dutch are very interested in. Or very well represented in decentralized identity for whatever reason. And the story I just told you was also featured in some of the presentations I saw there. So there's that. But there's also the Dutch intelligentsia. They have this weird feature, and I had someone explain this to me where this comes from. Apparently, it comes from the days of the rich kooplieden. I'm not sure what the right English
Merchants.
word for this is, but basically in in yeah, merchants, the rich Dutch merchants in the heyday of the Netherlands, they were basically the elite that ran the country, and there was this sense of Even though personally I'm not in power, I'm well connected enough and I know how the rules work that, and me and my friends are aligned that I'm not too worried about who exactly is in power. I'm part of the system and we can sort of maneuver and get our way. And I feel like that most people that went to college into the Netherlands, they've got that program is running in their mind more or less, and that's why they're not worried about these Nazi type scenarios or anything like that, because they just feel like me and my friends, we know how the system works. We're the upper echelons, and we have leverage, and so that's a protective mechanism for us, something like that. This is a different podcast, isn't it?
Valuable insights still.
I'm supposed to asking you
Indeed.
questions.
Shoot.
All right.
That sounds like a good place to
Shall we end
end.
it there?
Take care. Bye bye.
All right. You too. Bye bye.